The winter of 1974 arrived in Los Angeles without ceremony. The air sat cool and flat against the San Fernando Valley, and inside the Van Nuys Sports Arena on a Thursday evening in the third week of January, 412 people had gathered for the Southern California Open Invitational. The building smelled of matte rubber and old timber and the particular metallic cold that settles into concrete floors when the heating units are working at half their capacity. The lights above the competition floor were strong and yellow, the kind that flatten shadows and leave nothing soft in a face. The bleachers ran 3 tiers deep on 2 sides. Most seats were filled. People had driven in from Pasadena, from Torrance, from as far east as Riverside, because word had traveled in the weeks before that someone was competing who had not competed in the valley before. His name was being passed between instructors the way names rarely are, in a tone that was almost careful. His name was Victor Sorel. He had come from Amsterdam by way of a 12-month stint in Tokyo where he had trained under 2 instructors whose names meant something in the international circuit. He was 26 years old. He stood 7 feet and 1 inch in his competition barefoot. He weighed 268 pounds and not 1 pound of that weight was carried loosely. He had won 17 consecutive full contact bouts in 4 countries. He had broken the collarbone of a ranked fighter in Osaka, not from malice but from the application of force at the precise geometry where the human frame does not bend. He had not intended the injury, he had simply been accurate. He wore a red gi that evening that his Amsterdam school had embroidered with the year of his first championship. The embroidery was gold thread, and under the arena lights it caught the yellow and gave it back amber. He moved through his warm-up with the ease of someone who understood his own body in 3 dimensions. Every stretch was measured. Every rotation was deliberate. His hands were large enough that when he opened them, the span from thumb tip to the end of his smallest finger measured 11 inches. People in the front row noticed. They could not help it. In 17 minutes, one of those hands would be reaching not for an opponent, but for the floor. The tournament director that evening was a man named Harold Fitch, who had been running regional events in Southern California for 11 years. He had seen most things. He had watched champions embarrass themselves and unknowns step out of the crowd and reset the room. He was not a man who surprised easily. He sat at the scorer's table with a clipboard he had not yet opened, his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, watching Victor Sorel warm up with the focused attention of someone who is doing the arithmetic of a man in real time and getting a very large answer. Beside Harold sat a journalist named Paul Decker, who covered the martial arts circuit for a small but widely read trade publication. Paul had a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen. The legal pad remained untouched for most of the evening. There was a moment, and he would describe it later, when he finally did write it down, when he stopped being a journalist and became simply a witness. In the 3rd row from the floor, on the east side of the bleachers, away from the main scorer's table and against the aisle, a man sat in a denim jacket over a white shirt, a dark cap pulled low enough that the bill threw a shadow across his eyes. He was not stretching. He was not rolling his shoulders or tracking the room with the nervous energy of someone about to compete. His feet were flat on the floor. His hands rested on his knees. He was watching Victor Sorel's warm-up with no more visible emotion than a man watching weather move across a field. He was 34 years old. He weighed 173 pounds. He had brown hair beneath the cap and a mustache that was already becoming a recognizable feature in certain circles, though not in this building. He wore street shoes. He had arrived alone, without a training partner or a corner, and he had taken his seat in the 3rd row without speaking to anyone. His name would not appear on the competitor list until the administrative check-in at the scorer's table, 40 minutes into the evening. By that time, everything would already be decided. In 30 seconds of story time, 412 people were about to receive an education that none of them had enrolled for. Nobody in that building understood yet what they were sitting inside. If you have stayed with this channel before, you understand that some moments in a sport's history do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, in 3rd row seats, in denim jackets, in street shoes. Stay with this to the end. The sentence Victor Sorel heard from the floor that night, the sentence spoken to him, and only him, at a volume no one else could catch, would follow him for the rest of his career. We will get to it. But first, you need to understand who Victor Sorel was, fully. So that what happened means what it means. If this is the kind of story you watch to the end, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from tonight. Victor Sorel had begun training at 14 in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Rotterdam. His first instructor was a former Dutch national champion named De Vries, who had the specific philosophy that technique without physical dominance was incomplete. He trained Victor not only in the precision of kata and the geometry of joint locks, but in the generation of power from a large frame. How to use reach and mass not as substitutes for skill but as multipliers of it. Victor was not a man who won by outweighing his opponents. He won by applying precise technique at a leverage point where his size removed any margin for error on the other side. By 22, he had competed in Belgium, in Germany, in France, and in the United Kingdom. He had won in all 4 countries. He had been ranked 7th in Europe by the Federation's official circuit. Then he had gone to Tokyo, and what he learned there, under instructors he spoke of with a particular gravity, had refined the precision without reducing the power. He returned from Tokyo at 25 and won his next 4 bouts in under 3 minutes of total fight time across all 4. He was not an arrogant man by nature. This is important to understand. He was a man who had been told the truth about himself by the evidence of competition over a period of 12 years, and who had chosen to believe the evidence. The evidence said he was very good. He believed the evidence. The line between that and arrogance is thinner than most people acknowledge. And on a Thursday evening in January in Van Nuys, Victor Sorel would reach that line without knowing he was anywhere near it. The exhibition portion of the evening ended at 7:43. Victor had demonstrated 3 techniques against a willing training partner from the host school. A low spinning sweep that had the front row leaning forward before it landed. A pressure point lock that made a 210-pound man fold in half without visible effort. And a linear punch thrown at controlled speed that produced a sound on the padded target like a bat striking a fence post. The room responded each time with the silence that precedes applause. The half second when people are deciding whether what they saw was real. It was real. Harold Fitch at the scorer's table had watched all 3 techniques with his reading glasses still pushed to his forehead. He did not reach for the clipboard. The chuck-in period opened at 7:50. Victor walked to the edge of the competition area and surveyed the bleachers in the slow, deliberate way of a man taking stock of a room he has already concluded is his. His eyes moved across the faces the way a hand moves across a map. He was looking for the competition. He found, in his assessment, nothing that particularly concerned him. His eyes settled on the 3rd row of the east bleachers. There was a pause. Not long. 3 seconds. Perhaps 4. Victor Sorel turned to the young man from the host school who had assisted his demonstration and said, at full volume, gesturing toward the east bleachers with a nod of his head, "What is that? What is that man doing here?" The young man looked. He said something quiet that Victor either did not hear or chose not to hear. Victor said, "Is he competing?" The young man said he was on the registration list. Victor said, "That man." He was not lowering his voice. The front rows heard it clearly. "In the jacket. That man has no business in this room." Paul Decker, at the scorer's table, picked up his ballpoint pen. He did not yet write anything. He held the pen over the legal pad and watched. The man in the 3rd row had heard. The distance from the competition floor to the east bleachers at that point in the Van Nuys Sports Arena was 31 feet. Victor Sorel had not been quiet. 412 people were not making much noise. The man in the denim jacket had heard every syllable. His expression did not change. His hands did not move from his knees. He looked at Victor Sorel with the same quality of attention he had been giving the room since he sat down, which was the quality of a man who has been very still for a long time, and intends to remain so for a few minutes more. He stood. He did not stand quickly. The motion was unhurried. The way a man stands when he has decided something in a room where the decision costs him nothing. He removed the denim jacket. He folded it once lengthwise and set it on the seat beside him with the specific deliberateness of a man who intends to come back for it. He removed the cap. He placed it on top of the jacket, brim facing up. He walked down the 3 bleacher steps to the arena floor. The recognition did not happen all at once. It moved through the room the way temperature moves through water. First the people nearest the aisle where he had walked down, then the rows behind them, then the far bleachers, until the room had taken a collective breath and not yet released it. People were touching the arm of the person beside them. People were leaning toward each other. A woman in the 7th row said a name at a volume she had not intended, and several people turned. Victor Sorel heard none of it, or rather, he heard it and did not yet know what it meant for him. The man walked to the center of the competition floor in his street shoes and stood 8 feet from Victor Sorel. He was 5 feet 10. He weighed 173 pounds. Victor was 7 feet and 1 inch. The differential in height was 15 inches. Standing 8 feet apart on a flat floor under yellow arena lights, the gap was not subtle. It was a fact that the room registered physically, not with awe at Victor but with something closer to confusion about the geometry. The man in the street shoes did not look up. He did not look down. He looked directly at the center of Victor's chest, at the sternum, at the specific place where a large man's weight announces itself before his limbs do. He said, in a voice that Paul Decker could not hear from the scorer's table, but would reconstruct from 3 witnesses afterward, "Whenever you're ready." He had already lost. Victor Sorel had simply not received the information yet. A fight is not 2 large men exchanging force. A fight at this level, at the level where a decade and a half of training is present on both sides, is a conversation conducted in the language of distance. The man who controls the space between 2 bodies controls the outcome before contact is made. Distance is the sentence, everything else is punctuation. Victor Sorel's reach, standing upright, was 89 inches from fingertip to fingertip. At 7 feet and 1 inch, he was accustomed to beginning every engagement from a geometry where the opponent was already inside a disadvantage. At 6 feet, most men were close enough for Victor to reach but not yet close enough to return anything meaningful. This had been the story of 17 consecutive bouts. The man in the street shoes understood all of this before the first second began. The first second, Victor did not charge. He was too experienced for that. He stepped forward in a long arc to his left, a lateral entry designed to test the angle of response and close the distance in an oblique line that most opponents found difficult to track. It was a sound technique. At 7 feet, with a stride that covered 32 inches, it was a technique that had worked 17 times. The man in the street shoes turned with it, not dramatically, not in any way that suggested he had anticipated the specific arc. He simply turned, the way water turns around a slow intrusion, and when Victor's left foot landed, the relative position of the 2 men was unchanged. Victor had moved, the angle between them had not. Harold Fitch, at the scorer's table, set both hands flat on the table. The second, Victor committed to a front push kick, a long-range control technique deployed at the outer edge of his reach, not intended to damage but to measure and frame the space. It traveled the correct distance, at the correct angle. It was technically sound. A 268-pound man throwing a controlled kick at 11 feet of reach is a freight event even when it is not intended as an attack. The man in the street shoes was not at the end of that reach. He had not retreated. He had moved laterally, 3 inches. With a weight transfer so small it was visible only in the shifting of a shoulder, and the kick passed through empty air at the precise position where his center mass had been 1/4 of a second earlier. Paul Decker put his pen down on the legal pad. He would pick it up again in 40 seconds, but not to write. He would pick it up to have something to hold. The third second, Victor reset. This is where a trained observer sees the thing that a casual observer misses. Victor's reset was correct. His feet found their proper base. His guard came back to center. He had not been embarrassed by the miss. He had categorized it and continued. This is what 12 years of competitive experience produces. The ability to fail and continue without the failure becoming a conversation inside your own head that distracts you from what is in front of you. What was in front of him was a man who had moved 3 inches and not moved again. Victor threw a right cross from the shoulder, his strongest technique, delivered at perhaps 60% of full power to probe rather than finish. The sound of it cutting through arena air was audible in the front rows. The man slipped it, not by pulling back, not by raising a guard. He slipped it the way a door slips a thrown stone, by not being at the point of impact without appearing to have moved away from it. His head had traveled 4 inches to the right. The punch had been targeted at the left side of his jaw. The 4 inches was sufficient. Victor's fist completed its arc and found nothing, and for the first time in the evening, something shifted in Victor Sorel's face. It was not fear. Fear is too simple a word. It was the particular expression of a man who has asked a question he was certain he knew the answer to, and received a response he had not considered. It lasted 1/2 of a second, and then Victor's training reasserted itself, and the expression closed. But Paul Decker had seen it. The journalist with the legal pad and the untouched pages had seen it. He would describe it, years later, as the specific expression of a man who has just discovered that the room is larger than the map he brought. The 4th second, the man in the street shoes moved. For the first time since walking onto the competition floor, he initiated. He did not charge, he did not rush, he covered the distance between them in 1 step. A single step that used the full extension of his leg, and the forward press of his hip, and when that step landed, he was no longer 8 feet from Victor Sorel. He was inside Victor's reach. He was at a distance Victor had never been managed to in 17 bouts, because at that distance Victor's arms could no longer extend to generate force. At that distance, a 7-foot frame is not an advantage. At that distance the advantage belongs to whoever arrived there with a plan. A woman in the 7th row had not finished saying the name she had begun 3 seconds earlier. The 5th second, one technique, deployed from the inside, at the specific angle where a man's center of gravity cannot be corrected in time by the muscles that are trying to correct it. It was not a dramatic technique. There was no particular sound. There was the soft compression of canvas under a shifting weight, and then the specific silence that a room of 412 trained and experienced practitioners makes when they see something they understand fully, and will not forget. Victor Sorel's back found the floor. The strike had not landed.
This is the thing that the people in the front rows understood and the people in the upper bleachers did not. Because from above the angle of the stop was not visible. The technique had been pulled. It had been arrested 1 inch from contact, 1 inch from the jaw, held there for a fraction of a second in a way that was not accidental.
The technique had been controlled with a precision that was, in its own way, more unsettling than completion would have been. Victor was on the floor not because he had been struck, but because he had understood, in the half-second before the strike arrived, and was held, exactly what would have happened if it had not been held. He had gone down because the alternative was to receive the technique in full, and his body had made the correct calculation before his mind had finished the question. The room was not loud. This is the detail every witness would note afterward. Because a room that size, receiving a moment that size, would reasonably be expected to erupt. It did not. It was quiet with the weight of collective comprehension. 412 people who understood what they had watched were processing it in the specific silence of those who have seen something they will spend the rest of their lives trying to explain accurately. Harold Fitch had not moved his hands from the table. The man in the street shoes stood over Victor Sorel. He was not breathing hard. His shirt had not come untucked. He looked down at the man on the floor the way a teacher looks at a student who has just completed a very difficult problem by the wrong method, and arrived somehow at the correct page. He extended his right hand. The palm faced upward. An offer, not a gesture of dominance. The hand was held out the same way a hand is held out to someone who has stumbled on a curb, without theater, without weight, available and waiting. Victor Sorel looked at the hand for a moment that had no good measurement. Then he took it. As Victor found his feet, the man leaned toward him and spoke. 6 words. Perhaps 8. Nobody in the room could hear them. The words were directed at Victor alone, at the specific angle of a man choosing his audience with care. Victor's face, in receiving those words, went through a sequence that Paul Decker would describe as recognition, then something that might have been grief. Then, and this is the word he used, in the piece he eventually wrote, resolution. Victor stood fully upright. He was again 7 feet and 1 inch. The man beside him was 5 feet 10. The height differential had not changed. Everything else had. Victor Sorel was standing at a fork in the road. He could construct a careful account of what had occurred. The floor was unfamiliar. The shoes were a factor. He had not properly warmed into the match. These explanations existed. They were not entirely without merit. He could use them, and some men would have, and the record would have remained approximately ambiguous. He did not use them. He looked at the man who had helped him to his feet and said, at a volume the front rows could hear, "I understand now what I did not understand before." It was not a complete explanation. It did not need to be. The room received it as what it was, a man choosing accuracy over convenience in public, which is a harder thing than most men's records reflect. In the days after the Van Nuys Invitational, the story moved. It moved first through the people in that building, because 412 witnesses across 4 states and 3 countries represents a very broad distribution network when all 412 of them have something specific to say. It moved into dojos in Torrance and Pasadena and Riverside. It moved into the circuit newsletters that the trade journalists sent to their subscribers. Paul Decker eventually wrote 900 words about it for his publication, choosing his language carefully, declining to frame it as a defeat because he did not think defeat was the right word. His instructor in Amsterdam heard the story at second hand, from someone who had been told it by someone in the bleachers. He flew to Los Angeles 14 months later, specifically to watch the man in the denim jacket work. He would later describe what he observed, in a letter to another Dutch instructor, as the particular stillness of a man who has never needed to announce himself. Victor Sorel continued to compete. He adjusted. The adjustments were specific and deliberate, and rooted in what had happened on a Thursday in January, on a flat floor under yellow lights. He did not win his next 4 bouts, and he did not expect to. He won 3 of the next 8, which was a record that told a more honest story about the recalibration a skilled man undertakes when he has decided to build from what he learned rather than protect himself from it. Harold Fitch told the story at every tournament he ran for the next 9 years. The details shifted slightly with each telling. The crowd grew and shrank. The number of techniques varied by 1 or 2, but the essential architecture of it never changed. Because the essential architecture of it was not the kind of thing that misremembers easily. He had been there. He had watched it. He had set both hands flat on the table and not moved them. He remembered the weight of that. There is a version of the evening that circulated for a while in which Victor was carried from the floor. He was not. He stood and shook hands and stayed for 2 more hours watching the evening's remaining bouts with a quality of attention that the people near him described as different from the attention he had brought when he arrived. Quieter, more horizontal, closer to the floor. The man in the denim jacket retrieved his jacket and his cap from the 3rd row seat. He folded the jacket over his arm. He walked out through the east exit. One of the witnesses, a tournament judge from Pasadena named Robert Hale, who had his own modest ranking in the regional circuit, touched the man briefly on the shoulder as he passed. He would describe it afterward as an involuntary response. He had simply needed to confirm the weight of what had walked by him. The 6 words or 8 that were spoken on the floor between the extended hand and the rising, those words were carried by Victor Sorel alone for the next 18 months. He shared them eventually, in an interview with a Dutch magazine, in a context that made clear why he had taken the time to consider them before repeating them. What the man had said, he reported, was this: "You already know what you need to learn. You just stopped asking." The story a man tells about himself, and the story his body tells under observation at speed are 2 different stories. Most men live their entire careers inside the first one. The rare man, the man worth watching, the man worth traveling to see, has made it his project to close the distance between the 2 until there is no space left between them. That project does not end. It has no completion ceremony. It continues for as long as the man is honest enough to keep the question open. Victor Sorel, on the floor of the Van Nuys Sports Arena on a Thursday in January 1974, received the most expensive education available in his field, and he paid for it with the only currency that kind of education accepts: the willingness to understand what happened without insisting on a more comfortable version. That is worth more than any technique. It is worth more than reach, or record, or gold embroidery on a gi. Next on this channel, The evening in Houston when a decorated military combatives instructor decided that a film set was the right location to issue a challenge, and what the grip crew remembered afterward about the sound of the conversation ending. We will be there in the next video. If you watched to the end of this one, you already know where to be.